All right, let's dive deep into Moonlight. That 2016 film
Oh, yeah.
that took home the Oscar for Best Picture. We got this really interesting critique from a listener, and it goes way beyond just like your typical review. It digs into all the things that make Moonlight so powerful. But it also kind of asks these tough questions like,
Right.
is it actually a masterpiece? Or does it,
So does it hold up?
stumble in places?
Yeah. Does it truly hold up? And that's what I found so interesting about this critique is it really does look at both sides of the coin. Like, it celebrates everything that Moonlight does well.
Yeah.
But it also kind of turns it over and examines those potential weaknesses.
Right.
And I think that's what allows us to really grapple with the film's impact and its legacy.
Yeah, and one of the first things the critique jumps into is the film's structure. Like, it's told in these 3 chapters, right?
Right.
Little Chiron and Black, and each one captures a different stage of Chiron's life.
Yeah.
Why do you think the filmmakers chose this approach?
I think it's such a powerful way to kind of mirror how memory works, right?
Yeah.
It's not always linear. Sometimes it's more like these vivid snapshots from different points in time. And that's exactly what these chapters feel like. They give us these intense glimpses into Chiron's journey.
Right.
But they don't necessarily connect in a neat and chronological way.
Yeah, and the critique actually both praises and criticizes this approach, which I think makes a lot of sense. Like, you get this sense of growth, but maybe not always at like an even pace.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting because the critique highlights the Chiron chapter, the one where he's a teenager, as being like the most emotionally charged.
Yes.
It's so raw and vulnerable, and the stakes feel so incredibly high for him at that point. But then the Black chapter, the one that kind of wraps things up, that one feels a bit quieter, more introspective, and some viewers felt a bit let down by that. Like, it's almost like the ending didn't pack the punch that they were expecting.
Yeah, it's almost like it builds,
Yes,
and then
it lets you down gently instead of hitting that final, powerful note.
Totally. Now, pacing aside, something that really struck me was how the film tackles these big universal themes, right? Like identity, acceptance, resilience.
Yeah.
But it's always through this very specific lens of Chiron being a gay Black man in America.
And I think that's what makes Moonlight more than just a coming-of-age story, right?
Yeah.
It's also this social commentary. We're seeing how those universal struggles play out within a very particular cultural context.
Right.
Chiron's journey isn't just about him finding himself. It's about him navigating a world that often doesn't accept him for who he is.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the film's exploration of masculinity, which is something the critique really dives into deeply. We see Chiron, right? He's this shy, sensitive kid.
Right.
But then by adulthood, he's calling himself Black.
Right.
And he puts on this super tough persona. It's almost like armor.
It's like a shield.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating example of what we call performative masculinity.
Right.
He's adopting these behaviors, this outward image, not because it's who he truly is, but because it's what he feels he needs to do to survive in his environment.
Yeah, it makes you think about all the pressures.
All those pressures.
Especially for young Black men.
Absolutely.
To fit into these really narrow boxes of what it means to be a man.
Totally.
But the critique also points out that the film doesn't completely shy away from some familiar tropes, like the tragic queer archetype.
Yeah.
And some people might see that as like a little bit limiting.
Right. It's like this tension, isn't there?
Yeah.
Moonlight does so much to break new ground
Yes, it does.
in its portrayal of Black queerness. But it also kind of leans on some familiar narratives that I think some viewers felt could have been pushed further, challenged more directly.
It's like it takes 2 steps forward and then a half step back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely something to think about.
Definitely.
Now, one thing I thought was really interesting, and I think a lot of people did, was the casting.
Yes.
Chiron is played by 3 different actors throughout his life.
It's so powerful.
What do you think was the impact of that choice?
I think casting 3 different actors really emphasizes that identity is fluid, right?
Okay.
We see Chiron growing and changing, and I think those different actors bring such nuance to those shifts.
Yeah.
It's not just about physical changes.
Right.
It's about how his internal world is evolving too.
And then we have all the supporting characters. Juan, Paula, Kevin. Each one plays a pretty significant role in shaping who Chiron becomes.
They really do. And they each kind of represent different facets of his life, different challenges he has to face. Like Juan, the drug dealer, is such an unexpected source of fatherly guidance.
Right.
And it really challenges our assumptions about who can be a positive influence, even when they're flawed themselves.
Look like not your typical father figure.
Exactly.
Right. And Paula, his mom, who's struggling with addiction, shows us how those cycles of hardship can impact families and whole communities.
Yeah.
Then you've got Kevin, Chiron's friend and love interest, who brings both these moments of connection but also intense betrayal.
Absolutely. However, the critique does point out that some of those supporting characters felt a bit underdeveloped.
Okay.
Like their lives, their motivations, they mainly revolved around Chiron.
Right.
And it kind of leaves us wanting a little bit more of their individual stories.
It's almost like they're like planets orbiting Chiron's sun.
Yes, exactly.
But okay, let's talk about where Moonlight truly shines.
Oh, yeah.
Visually, this film is stunning.
It's breathtaking.
What stood out to you about the cinematography?
Oh, Moonlight it's a visual feast. The cinematographer, James Laxton, he uses natural light to create this incredibly intimate atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like you are right there.
You feel like you're there.
In the room with the characters. And the color palettes, so rich.
So good.
The blues and cool tones evoke this sense of melancholy and longing, which perfectly mirrors Chiron's emotional state throughout the film.
Yeah. And Nicholas Britell's score
phenomenal.
is just phenomenal. It blends like classical and contemporary influences so seamlessly. And it adds this whole other layer of emotional depth without ever feeling overbearing.
And it never dictates the emotion. It just underscores it.
Yeah.
It's such a subtle but powerful element.
Totally. Okay. And speaking of the craft of filmmaking.
Yes.
There's one technical aspect that the critique spends a little bit of time on, the editing.
Oh, the editing. Okay.
So like the transitions between the 3 chapters are so smooth, but within each chapter there are moments that feel a bit jarring.
They feel a little...
almost like pieces are missing.
It's like you've missed a step in the conversation.
Yeah, like someone changed the subject and you're trying to like catch up.
Yes.
And the critique points out that this abruptness is especially noticeable in the final chapter. Which, as we said, already has a more subdued pace.
It does, yeah.
And it can leave you feeling...
it's a bit disorienting.
Yeah, a little disoriented.
Yeah.
Now, beyond all the technical stuff, we can't ignore, like, the cultural impact of Moonlight.
Right.
It was groundbreaking in its portrayal of Black queerness.
It really was.
Which is a topic we just don't see a lot in mainstream cinema.
Very rarely.
Yeah.
It was absolutely a major step forward for representation.
Yes.
I mean, it opened up conversations about identity, race, and sexuality that had been largely silenced in Hollywood.
But the critique raises a really interesting question here, which is, does the film's success, it's like masterpiece status, does it potentially overshadow other stories from diverse communities
their voices
that might not be as polished or as,
as acclaimed? Yeah.
It's something to think about, right?
It really is. It's a good question.
Because we're celebrating this one film's achievement.
Right.
But could that make it harder for other films to get that same attention?
It's like a paradox, isn't it? A film breaking barriers, but perhaps also creating new ones.
Right.
It's something we have to be mindful of.
We do. Okay, so we've talked about the structure, the themes, the characters, the technical brilliance, and even the cultural ripples of Moonlight. But one thing the critique keeps coming back to is this idea of emotional authenticity.
Yeah.
Why do you think that's so important here?
Because I think that's what makes the film so deeply affecting.
Okay.
It's not trying to manipulate your emotions with these big dramatic moments. Instead, it relies on these small, intimate moments of connection. It feels real, lived in, like we're witnessing a life unfold rather than watching a performance.
And there's this real trust in the audience to understand those emotions without, like, needing everything spelled out.
Absolutely.
Like that beautiful scene where Juan is teaching young Chiron to swim.
Yeah.
It's so quiet and tender.
No soaring music, just that quiet moment.
Yeah.
It's the power of suggestion. The unsaid Moonlight trusts us to fill in those gaps, to connect with those characters on a deeper level. And I think that trust makes the emotional impact even stronger.
And it's kind of mind-blowing when you consider how much depth is in this film, how well crafted the storytelling is.
Yeah.
That this is only Barry Jenkins' second feature film.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes about his talent.
It really does.
And his vision as a filmmaker. I mean, he has this incredible ability to tell stories that are both deeply personal, but also universally relatable. And I think Moonlight is a testament to the power of independent cinema to really bring these intimate stories to the forefront.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound stories come from the most unexpected places.
Absolutely.
From voices we haven't heard enough from.
Yes.
So where does that leave us in our deep dive into Moonlight?
Yes.
We've explored its structure, its themes, the characters, the technical brilliance, its cultural impact, and that undeniable emotional authenticity.
I feel like we're just getting started.
I know, right.
Oh, we also wrestled with some of the critique's points about its potential shortcomings, recognizing that even a film lauded as a masterpiece can have its flaws.
It's true.
But I think at its core, Moonlight remains this really powerful and thought-provoking work of art that continues to spark conversations and challenge perspectives.
It really does.
It's a film that invites us to embrace complexity, to confront our own biases, and to appreciate the beauty of imperfection.
Oh, I like that.
Both in art and in life.
Yeah. And speaking of imperfection, there's one final point from the critique that I think is worth unpacking.
Oh, okay, let's hear it.
It's a thought-provoking one, for sure.
Okay, I'm intrigued. It asks if Moonlight, like, by reaching this masterpiece level, could it accidentally set the bar too high?
Yeah.
For other films that want to explore those same themes?
It's a tough question, right?
It is.
Like, on one hand, Moonlight was huge.
It was.
It proved that a movie about a black, gay main character could win the biggest awards in Hollywood.
Exactly.
But could that success actually make it harder for other movies to get noticed?
Right, especially
movies that might be, I don't know, rougher around the edges.
Yeah, or more experimental.
Yes.
Or less, conventionally perfect.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a double-edged sword, right?
It is.
We want to celebrate Moonlight, but we also have to make sure it doesn't overshadow everyone else.
Right, like it shouldn't be the only kind of story that gets attention.
It's on all of us then, like viewers, critics,
Creators,
everyone. We can't let one movie, however groundbreaking, define what representation looks like.
We have to be careful about the standards we set,
Oh.
and make sure we're not accidentally ignoring other powerful stories.
Especially
just because they don't, fit the mold.
Just because they're different.
Yeah, exactly.
Which brings us back to that idea that imperfection is okay.
It is.
Maybe even essential.
I like that.
Like, we should be open to different styles.
Totally.
Different points of view, different ways of telling a story.
Absolutely. Let's celebrate movies that push boundaries.
Yes.
Right? Challenge conventions. Even if they don't fit neatly into that.
Masterpiece category.
Masterpiece category. Exactly.
And this ties back to something we talked about before with masculinity. Moonlight shows us Chiron's vulnerabilities. Like his struggles to be himself.
Right.
It challenges those old school rigid ideas of what it means to be a man.
Totally.
And I think that's a powerful counter-narrative, especially for young black men who don't always see themselves represented accurately on screen.
It's like the movie is saying, hey, it's okay to not have it all figured out.
Exactly.
It's okay to be vulnerable.
It's okay not to be perfect.
Yeah, and that message is powerful for anyone, really.
It is.
I think it resonates even more because it's so authentic.
So real.
Like, the movie doesn't shy away from the messiness of life.
Yeah, the complications.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell us how to feel.
Right.
It just lets us experience those emotions alongside the characters.
It does. Like, we're drawn into their world through these, small gestures and quiet moments.
Those little connections. Like, remember when Chiron and Kevin reconnect as adults?
Oh, yeah, at the diner.
At the diner. And there's this long pause before Kevin touches Chiron's hand.
Yeah.
So much is said in that silence.
I know. And so much of that moment's power comes from what's not said.
Exactly.
It's like the film trusts us to understand, to fill in the gaps.
With our own experiences.
Yeah.
And that trust makes the connection between the viewer and the film even stronger.
So it's more than just a movie you watch. It's a movie you feel and think about later.
And it stays with you,
With us.
It makes you rethink things.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the structure, masculinity, the technical aspects, how authentic the emotions feel, and even the potential downsides of the movie's success.
Yeah.
What stands out most to you about Moonlight?
What really gets me is how the film doesn't try to give us easy answers.
Okay.
It tackles tough issues and leaves us with more questions than solutions.
I like that.
Which is a good thing.
It is.
It keeps the conversation going.
It does.
Even after the movie ends.
And that's what art should do, right?
Exactly. It should challenge us, make us think. Make us think about the world.
Yeah.
And maybe even ourselves.
And Moonlight does that really well.
It does.
It sticks with you.
It does. You find yourself thinking about the characters, the themes, those emotions. Yeah. It becomes a part of you.
Okay. I think we've covered a lot.
We have.
The artistry, the impact, the good and the bad, as a critique sees it.
But like with any deep dive, there's always more to discover.
Always.
Moonlight is a movie that you can watch again and again.
Right.
And see something new each time.
That's the beauty of film.
It is.
It's not just something you passively watch.
No, it's a dialogue.
Right?
It invites you to engage, to question, to feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with Moonlight, that conversation is especially rich.
It challenges us. It makes us think.
Now, before we finish up, I want to go back to something you said earlier.
Okay.
About how Moonlight's success could affect other films.
Right.
That deal with similar themes.
Yeah. How do we celebrate one great film without creating a barrier for others?
Yeah, because the goal isn't just to have one Moonlight.
Right.
We need lots of stories.
From all kinds of voices.
Yeah, from different perspectives.
Exactly.
So we can better understand each other.
And that means we need to broaden our idea of what makes a movie successful.
What do you mean?
It's not just about awards. It's about impact.
Okay.
The conversations, it starts the perspectives, it changes.
So as viewers, as critics, as filmmakers even.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that Moonlight's legacy leads to more diverse stories?
I think it starts with recognizing that there's no one way to be excellent.
Okay.
We need to be open to movies that don't fit into neat categories.
Yeah.
Movies that challenge the rules, experiment with style.
Right.
And we need to support those voices that haven't always been heard.
Yeah, create space for them.
Absolutely.
To tell their stories authentically.
Without pressure to reach some standard or win a bunch of awards.
Yeah, it's about valuing all those different experiences.
Yes, and making sure our movies reflect that.
Okay.
All that messiness, all that imperfection.
That's a good way to put it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Moonlight, I think the main thing to take away is the movie is a masterpiece, yes, but it's also a call to action.
I like that.
A call to embrace the imperfect.
Right.
To celebrate all those different voices out there.
Yeah.
And to make room for more stories to be told.
Because ultimately, it's all those stories together that will help us understand each other.
And ourselves.
Exactly. That's the power of film.
It is. So on that note, we'll leave you to think about Moonlight and all the questions it raises.
Go watch it if you haven't.
Yeah. Watch it again if you have.
And let's keep talking about it.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions.
Right.
Keep diving deep.
It's like this whole episode has been about responsibility, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Filmmakers have a responsibility to tell stories that are real. Critics have a responsibility to be fair with their standards.
Right.
And we, as viewers, have a responsibility to be open to different kinds of stories.
It's on all of us.
Yeah.
And the critique ends on this like super interesting point.
Okay.
It asks this question.
Yeah.
What if, instead of trying so hard to be perfect, we just embrace the beauty of imperfection?
I love that.
Especially in art, you know?
Yeah.
It ties into everything we've talked about being more open and celebrating all kinds of stories.
So Moonlight is this amazing film, right?
It is.
But what if it inspires a whole bunch of other films that are more raw, more experimental? Even a little rough around the edges. Yeah.
Exactly. What if those movies, even if they're not like quote unquote perfect, can still touch us, make us think, start important conversations?
I mean, life isn't perfect.
No, not at all.
So why should art be?
Exactly. Sometimes the most powerful art is the art that reflects that messiness.
I agree.
That imperfection.
It's not about lowering our standards.
Right. It's not about that.
It's about being more open-minded.
Yes, exactly.
And maybe if we embrace that imperfection, we'll discover all these amazing stories that we might have missed otherwise.
Those stories that surprise us.
Yes.
That make us think differently.
Challenge us.
Yeah, challenge us.
Those are the stories that can really change the world.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've explored Moonlight, right?
We have.
filmmaking, the impact it had, what it does well, and where it maybe falls short.
And I think the big takeaway is Moonlight is a masterpiece, but it's also a challenge to all of us.
A challenge to embrace imperfection.
Yes.
To listen to different voices.
To be more inclusive.
Yeah, and to make space for as many stories as possible.
Because all those stories, together, they give us a fuller picture of who we are.
And on that note, we'll leave you to think about Moonlight and everything it makes you feel.
Go watch it again.
Yeah, go watch it.
Keep thinking about it. Keep talking about it.
And until next time.
Yeah.
Keep exploring. Keep questioning.
Keep diving